Hello, everyone. If everything went well, we are live now. I can see people joining. We are 36, 37. I'll give it a couple of more minutes till everyone joined the floor. So, a couple of more seconds. We're already at 42. I'm really happy to welcome you all. Sharing stage with me today is Evert, Karam, and Chloe. Before they will do a quick round of introductions. Like I said in the beginning, we'll just wait for a second because Danica told me that we had more than 100 signups and we are just at 47. So for everyone who wants to grab another cup of tea or potentially a glass of water, feel free to do so. And then we'll kick things off in a minute or two. People are signing up, which is good. Amazing. First messages in the chat are coming in as well, which is good. People are excited.
Great sign. Everything's working.
Oh, first familiar faces also here. Hi, Olga. Look at that. All right. I'd say let's get going. We have a packed agenda. We have 58 more minutes. I know there's so much wisdom in the room to be able to share with you. So I'm really excited. The main topic that we're going to speak today about is, as you can see in the headline, is about compensation trends. Stability meets transformation. And the way we structured the session is that we have three different parts. The first one, where we speak a bit more about the stability in compensation and the trends that we saw in our 2026 compensation trends reports and also the reports that we had in 2024 and 2025. I'm quite sure they are familiar to most of you. If not, I recommend checking them out because the feedback that we're getting is more than phenomenal. Thank you very much, Tabitha, for putting them together. The second section speaks a bit more about transformation, everything happening around AI, workforce shifts that we can detect. And last but not least, probably a topic that everyone is currently talking about, the EU Pay Transparency Directive and what it means for all of our companies. And that's what we will be talking today. Before we kick things off, I would love to ask Evert, Karam, and Chloe do a quick round of introduction. Evert, you're the first on my screen, so I can ask you to do a quick intro.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Evert. I'm based in Tallinn, Estonia, and I manage compensation for Bolt. We operate in 50 different countries, so it makes life really interesting for all of us. And also I do trainings and consultations for local companies as well.
Thank you, Evert.
Oh, is it me? Is it me?
Yeah, oh, sorry. Yeah, you next on my screen. Sorry for that.
Okay.
I was waiting as well.
So smoothly. Great. Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Karam Deo. I am Senior Reward Analyst at GoCardless, a fintech. I am London-based, and we operate in a variety of countries. Not as many as 50 in Uber, but yeah, we have somewhat of a global presence. So thanks very much for asking me here today. Super excited.
And I'll go last. I'm Chloe. I'm currently based in Berlin. I'm people lead at EQT Partners, where I support and advise early stage tech companies across the US and Europe on all people and talent topics. So it was great to see all of you here, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you all so much for doing the intro, and sorry for messing up the quick handovers from one to each other. As you can see, we have so much knowledge in the room, different companies, different industries, different geolocations. So I'm really curious to hear all of your perspectives to the different questions. To kick things off, one of the main findings that we had over the last 2-3 years is that compensation stabilized if we look at the annual salary increases on a department level. Right now, on average, it's around 5%. You can see hiring rates are a bit down from 29 to 28%. So you could still say they're quite similar to the last years. And my first question to you would be, how are you seeing the stability play out? Do you see it in your organization, across your portfolio, or potentially the wider market? Evert, maybe you can start kicking things off and sharing your perspective.
Yeah, I do think we have seen somewhat of a stabilization in a lot of countries, especially in Western Europe, but we also operate in a number of Eastern European, African, Asian countries. And I would say like compensation and wage growth is still very location specific. And I do have a number of locations where this year as well, we see wage growth around 10% and more for specific countries. But I do agree that for majority of Europe, there has been a stabilization, and that of course helps us as well in the budgeting part, which is, I'm sure, a big topic for a lot of people at the moment here in the audience as well.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Chloe, I know working at EQT, you touch on so many different businesses, most of them obviously VC backed. What's your sense of the market when you look at the different stages, potentially even, and the maturity of the companies that you're working with?
I think it's really interesting when I saw this topic come up for the discussion. I was thinking about it, and it's like, because it wasn't something that I came across so bluntly, to be honest, like across the companies, but also I work with a lot of companies that are always in motion and always changing. There's always something happening, right? Especially now with AI or deep tech. But yeah, I think in different types, it really depends on the kind of in the type of technology and where they are. I think things have stabilized to a certain degree. I actually found really interesting a post that Vasa did today she was talking about something else, which was leaders and people's teams attrition. And she posted some numbers, which were really interesting. But I'm actually, when I kind of talking about stability, is like, I'm kind of questioning is it actually stability? Is the market really stable? Is it just kind of a waiting game? Because what she posted, and I completely see that, is like people are actually staying in their jobs. And then because the market is not great right now for job seekers, right? It's a very an employee market. Everybody's dictating that. And then some really great people are going fractional. It's like I've tried to get some people to come and work for some of our companies, and just like, no, I'm happy where I am. And I think there's a bit of that, and people are just waiting for it. So I wonder it's a bit of a false stability in a way, and wonder also what's going to happen eventually when the market will swing to the other direction, as it usually does. And yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how companies will react to that.
I really like the way of thinking that the potential stability that you might be able to see in the numbers might also be a waiting game where employees feel more secure or well treated in the companies where they're at right now and care about certainty rather than uncertainty these days. Karam, I saw you nodding. Maybe you can share your thoughts with us as well, because
yeah.
No.
Disagree. No. Yeah, no, I completely echo that. I think that this kind of pseudo stability, obviously, that Chloe touched on, in terms of, is it actually stable, or is it, a bit of a calm before an incoming AI storm, right? I think that is definitely something that is probably at play here. And I think that, people staying sort of in their jobs, partly, I imagine, in terms of, the liking where they are and all of that kind of stuff, but also the kind of the concept of the unknown of what they would be jumping into. I think that is because things are shifting in a way that is sort of unforeseen in terms of this, widest landscape that we're shifting into now with the big AI looming. I think that is a bit of a waiting game on both sides, right? Companies and organizations, not necessarily having the full picture of what that will look like for them. And so then obviously people thinking, well, it's not necessarily that clear what I'm moving into. So it's almost like this sort of like stalemate of like, well, are you going to go? And it's like, well, what awaits me? So I think that's probably speaks to a little bit in terms of this kind of mutual standoff of this stability at the moment, where you have sort of this unknown on both sides.
Yeah. In terms of the uncertainty that you touched on, a follow-up question from our end would be, Evert, you also touched on it in the beginning, like having a bit more strategic and security and planning for 2026 when you look at the company goals, when you look at your hiring plans. Now, we also uncovered that this might be kind of like a tricky situation, since does it really mean stability? We don't know. what are your thoughts and how do you approach potential hiring plans in 2026? Maybe Karam, Evert?
Yeah. I think in some ways it's a bit of a double-edged sword in terms of, you know, this kind of stability, meaning that we're not sort of as reactionary as we previously has been when things have been very volatile in the market, means that we actually have a bit more breathing space and a bit more headroom to actually think more strategically and work. I think, you know, speaking selfishly as an in-house reward team member, I think that being able to sort of work with like leaders and hiring managers specifically, etc., in those kinds of areas where previously it's been very kind of go, 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 and now, and this person or no one. I think zooming out in this brief respite of stability, however short or fake it might be, and then being able to sort of like properly put that in place. So I think that, you know, while I'm not going to sit here and be like, oh yeah, these are all the things that everyone needs to be doing, I think that in some ways it's a bit of a luxury in of itself that we have the mindset of even thinking about, well, what can we do? What should we do? And I think that that's not to be taken lightly at the moment in terms of maybe pivoting how we would otherwise work with leaders in these types of business areas that is otherwise so go, 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 and maybe just having a bit more of a slow down and a zoom out to think about what could possibly happen and how we could possibly react to that.
Sorry, I was gonna add to that because I think it's spot on, and I think this is really the time to think about when things will swing on the other side. Like, what can I do as a company overall? You know, looking at all your people initiatives and strategies, you know, to make sure that we're not back to the, you know, that place where you're constantly reactive. Right? You have this time, use it wisely. Put things in place to make sure that you retain the people that you want to retain, and people just don't jump ship the moment things turn another direction. And yeah, I mean, people teams will love that, having some time to breathe, right? And actually doing things and not keeping like putting fires out. Not every single company, unfortunately, has that luxury right now, depending on where you are in the market. So yeah, if you have that, do it. Like right now. Yes.
And I think the slowdown obviously is partly also because of economic conditions. So a lot of companies are struggling, which means they can't raise the salaries as much as they would like to or need to in some instances. And I see that in our case as well, where we very consciously now monitor how much is our revenue growth and how much is our payroll costs growing to make sure that we don't go ahead of the business in terms of the cost that we put into the people operations.
And I think
the same for other companies as well, because raising money and you know, getting additional revenue is much harder now than it was a few years ago.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think that, you know, that is definitely a big part of it. And also, I guess on the other side of that coin, kind of having the space to be a bit more creative with what you do have at the moment, right? I think that, you know, thinking about things like, you know, automation, simplification, upcoming transparency, all of those things require in some way or another some type of resource. And so I think that, you know, having the bandwidth to be able to be more cognizant and deliberate in the choices that you're making to allocate that resource, however stretched or thin it might be. If you have the luxury, as Chloe says, to have a quieter time, then put your mind to that.
It sounds from all of the answers that you gave, it sounds to me that now is probably not only the personal time to reflect, because it's the end of the year, right? Everybody's thinking about, oh, what should we do differently in the next year? What went well with the last years? It sounds like, from your point of view, that's also like an advice for companies and different departments in the company to also take a moment to reflect on what worked well. Where do you want to be in 2026, potentially 2027, and prepare two different scenarios, right? One scenario of the stability that we just uncovered, if that stays, or what will happen if there's an upswing or potentially a downward spiral again from the AI shift, right? Everybody's speaking about the AI boom now. Studies are coming out if they can really live up to the hype. So I think it's going to be really interesting, and that brings us to the second part of our panel discussion today, where we speak a bit more about the AI hiring, the boom that we have seen over the last 6 months, and what we saw in the data, that there was an uptick for all of positions where there was even some sort of AI or machine learning involved, right? There was an uptick of 90%. Companies ended up pay premiums around 15 to 20% for these roles. We even saw numbers from Silicon Valley, like Facebook, where people get like 1 million, 10, or even 100 million as like a sign-on bonus, right? Crazy numbers. So I'd love to hear your perspective, especially now on this AI topic. Potentially, Chloe, maybe you can touch on that one. What is your thought about this whole AI boom? How do you see it in the different stages of the companies you're working with?
So this is like a topic that I've been digging into for the last few months. And actually, we did a report, especially to kind of try to answer some of these questions. And we did focus on executive compensation, but we came across, the entire AI compensation like bubble. And I think and from my perspective, it's like, there's a lot of hype on the media, right? And there's a lot of things that people are like taking, like the media needs to be sensationalized, dramatized. So of course, the first thing that people will say is like, oh, now AI engineers are making $1 billion, which is insanity, right? I think one thing with when we looked at that more, especially for founders, and how I talk to my founders and my companies when we look at this, is really trying to distinguish, first of all, which bucket are you in terms of AI companies, right? If you are a company, traditional tech company that needs to be competitive, adding AI features, you don't really need to, the premium itself doesn't need to be so high, and especially it doesn't need to be there for all the roles, right? It needs to be for the few engineers that will help you build those features. If you're an AI native company, you're going to have a premium across the board, right? But it's not going to be the same as OpenAI or Anthropic, who are actually building the foundational models, right? I think this is first distinction that we need to kind of, the companies or people need to really think about. And then also the roles which roles have impact, right? And the premium kind of follows that a little bit. And I think from what we've seen is not just total cash comp, right? Is equity. Equity is becoming a big topic in Europe, especially as well. And now we're also seeing like conversations where not just cash, but even equities, it's going towards more the US numbers. Not for every role, by the way. We're talking about high demand, high impact roles, right? Also be aware of that. So I think that to answer kind of in quicker your question, 100, you can compete with the bigger companies. You just need to be aware, like getting really, really great talent. You just need to be aware of where you stand in the market, who you actually want to hire. I think this is becoming maybe something that both Karam and Evert saw more, but getting more into the weeds of like, what is this role? What is trying to achieve? What is the impact? And then adapt where the premium or the compensation is going to go for that. Because they will also know how much they're valued and how much they can ask. And you also need to tell them, this is what we can offer. And also tell the story around that. So I think that's important. I don't know if Karam, Evert, you've seen that too.
Let's hand this question over to Evert, right? Because in the beginning, when we started the panel, you also touched on the difference between Western and Eastern Europe, right? And if we look at our data through Eastern Europe, there's so many tech companies building out like tech hubs because you can find so much talent in these regions. So maybe you can share your perspective on what Chloe touched and also a bit on your regional knowledge for these regions.
Yeah, sure. I do agree. Like a lot of companies in Europe and in this region are not building the actual AI models similar to OpenAI, Meta, and others. So I think it's natural that we won't see similar type of offers in Europe for the time being. I do agree with the fact that equity will become a bigger part of the picture for total compensation, especially because a lot of companies can be more flexible in that area. Because even, if you need that talent now, I do think that many companies already are thinking about pay transparency and what that means once you start creating these exceptions for certain roles. But yeah, definitely engineering and tech roles carry a premium, but I haven't seen like this huge premium for AI-specific engineers at the moment, but maybe that will come in a year or two. What I have heard from some other companies is that if they are having these types of dedicated roles, then they do tend to benchmark them higher, for example, to the 90th percentile to make sure that they can recruit them and retain them. But from Bolt's perspective, we at the moment don't have such specific roles. So we are trying to, as Chloe said, make the company more AI native. So we use the tools that are being created by other companies and make sure that we implement them in the best way throughout the company. And I think there was also an interesting article from IBM or someone this week, which was a bit pessimistic about whether the investments can ever actually be profitable. So that's an interesting thing to see as well.
Great stuff. And also, if you, like Chloe mentioned, right, if you try to win a war against OpenAI, Anthropic, you most likely won't win it. So it really comes down to understanding what goals this role should cover for you or achieve from a business perspective. Maybe Karam, you can speak a bit about how would you approach it with, let's say, the head of engineering. You said that you most likely will take time to sit down with them, think about your strategic initiatives for 2026. So how would you incorporate the AI trend in the conversations with the head of engineering and potentially even guide the conversation towards, we really need to understand what qualifications we need to have and why?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I think to be honest, that's pretty much it. I think that, there's this real sense of the buzzwords being in the zeitgeist, and so people are getting like nervous and being like, well, I need these people, and it's more about sort of, well, what do you need them to be doing specifically, and why would we as a business be needing to do that? And so I think that, whether it's sort of people with the technical skills, people with these particular skill sets, or indeed in a wider sense, sort of, tools and frameworks, I think that before kind of going out and jumping the gun, I think it's a case of really just taking that zoom out and being a bit more kind of sort of thoughtful in the approach of thinking about, well, actually, yes, there are premiums on certain skills that we might be seeing, but actually, do we need to be competing with the premiums for those specific skills? Because are they actually going to be beneficial to where we want to go? Also, are the skills otherwise already in the business adaptable at all to whatever we want to achieve if we want to take it iteratively? I think that, again, when we're seeing sort of these headlines in Silicon Valleys and millions and billions, et cetera, it's very easy to get spooked. It's very easy to think that you're already being left behind, when actually, there are always going to be front runners that are exceptional in terms of both of their progress and what they're delivering. But I think that taking the time to figure out where we fit into that wider picture and wider landscape, I think is a more sensible way of doing it than to have these knee-jerk sort of premiums offered. To speak to your point, Evert, especially with transparency looming, that's the danger at any point with premiums on kind of skills of the month or skills of the day, right? You sort of get these in and then they're on your payroll forever, and then you potentially sort of have you get yourself into knots in terms of when they're not necessarily as premiums are required anymore. So I think that in terms of the conversations with leaders and how we want to approach it, I think in some ways it's very analogous to the conversations that have always been in terms of what are we trying to achieve, what are the people that will get us there, and then it's a conversation around, is this premium worthy? Should we be competing with the bigger ones? Is it AI and nothing else? I think that in some ways is almost the kind of tail end of the conversation. You need to know what you're doing and why you're doing it. Mm-hmm. You start then throwing money at roles that other people are doing just because.
Yeah, and I think what I've been also seeing is like getting the structure in place, right? Like the knowing what role you're hiring for, exactly what the role is doing, and also the compensation structure behind is actually starting much earlier than it used to be. Because as you point out, you need to have those, you need to know who you're hiring for, what's the impact, and how that's going to affect the entire organization. And especially when looking at equity, how's that going to affect your pool and how much you're going to have left. And this conversation is actually starting sooner, and I'm seeing founders actually building structures way sooner than it used to be, which I think is great. I've always been a huge advocate of that, but it is going into that direction, right?
Now, the whole AI topic is, like you said, right? It gives sometimes the feeling that you're lagging behind. And if you look at like an innovation curve, you always have the innovators, the early adopters, and sometimes late majority. And if we look at the adoption rate of AI at different surveys, especially for Europe or Germany, I think a lot of companies are still lagging behind. I know that employees in the businesses, some of them use large language modules, some companies already have AI policies in place. What would be your suggestion potentially? And we speak about like having an AI native company or making your company AI ready. How would you do it potentially, Everett, maybe from a consultancy point of view? Is like, what measures can you implement to support companies using these technologies as well?
Oh, that's a really good question. And it, of course, depends a lot on the actual company and what they are doing. I think you have to always start with the why and what are you trying to achieve with the AI and what is the expected outcomes as well. Something that I see at the moment is that a lot of companies are giving employees the tools without any guidance or any kind of direction. Just, the tool exists, learn to use it and use it in your work rather than doing it more deliberately. So I think one of the key starting points that AI can help you with at the moment is kind of automating all of the recurring tasks and the simpler tasks. So that I would say is the number one achievable goal that everyone can set. But then after that, you should also consider where it makes sense. I know our company has tested or is testing AI for customer support as well. And I can say it has, different outcomes and a lot of feedback coming in from clients about that topic. So you have to be deliberate and choose where it makes sense to go all in and where it might make sense to wait a bit until the models and the tools are maturing.
Anybody want something to add to this question?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. It's when I talk to my companies about how they want to implement AI, especially for their people teams to make them more efficient, more lean in some cases, I always go back to when you're trying to implement any type of tool in the company, you look at AI as a tool, you need to kind of really map out what is that you need and what it's gonna do and what you wanna take over from and then test it out, right? You implement it, it's gonna take 3 to 6 months for adoption, feedback, and you need to use the same process. What I've seen sometimes is that people use AI as I'm just implementing it, and then that's it. And you expect people to just adopt it tomorrow or just to take over this, or maybe it's like hiring a person, but it's not. It's still a tool. So I think kind of echoing what Everett said is you need to test these things out to make sure that it makes sense for why you want to whatever you want to replace, whatever kind of tasks or things that you want to replace with AI. What does it make sense? And I would say that especially if you're thinking about replacing headcount with AI, really think first what exactly you want it to do and how it's going to do it, and test it out before, especially if it's customer service in that sense and you're talking to your customers. You really don't want to do that. But even with your employees, right? You still want to have a great experience with your candidates, employees. So don't rush it. That would probably be my advice. Really think about it. People have the luxury now to have the time. You can do this. Future-proof the organization. Help out with that, with implementing some of the AI tools to make it more efficient, but thinking what it will entail.
Karam, again.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm talking over you because I think I'm on a slight lag. I'm not being rude, I promise.
No. I was just saying it seems like you have a lot to add to that again.
Oh, does it? Okay. then I better add something. No. I vehemently agree. I think that there is something definitely to be said about the taking the stock, taking the time to think about where it makes sense and why we're doing this. I think, in the kind of first phases and the kind of the immediacy that AI has been sort of catapulted into the mainframe, I think that we hear a lot about quick wins in terms of like, implement AI for quick wins here and there. And yes, there are legitimate quick wins, but I think that it's potentially the phrase quick win can sometimes be a smokescreen for quite kind of like sporadic and siloed and fractured sort of implementation of AI to kind of like help like sort of processes and steps in processes kind of here and there. That don't necessarily kind of come from a holistic kind of cohesive lens of like a sort of an organizational wide sort of aim or approach. And so I think that one of the blessings and potential curses of obviously having these pipe dreams of being able to automate everything and chatbots here and agentification here, I think that part of a real risk of that is having these every now and again sort of bits of AI hither and thither, which means that actually it ends up being a little bit more complicated than it was when you started, because you have some bits which are still manual, some bits which are still sort of headcount, some bits which have been automated. And if everyone is doing that at their own pace, in their own little world, in their own little bubble, and we as people team know that people exist in bubbles, they always have and they always will to some degree. And so I think once you superimpose a layer of AI on that, I think that, again, my hesitance to echo what Chloe Anna had said, just making sure that it's coming from a real, deliberate, holistic, cohesive place to start with. We want it to enhance, not to add to our headache.
What do you feel like would be responsible to have that cohesive view for the business? Who should be involved in thinking about the strategy of adapting AI, also in compensation, but for the other parts of the business? Would that be like an exercise for the whole company? Should there be only selected people? What's your thought on that?
Oh, that is a big question. I think that, I think that as with anything, there's a potential of too many cooks, right? It shouldn't be that everyone is putting an oar in. But I do think that part of the discussion and sort of, kind of determination of who has a seat at that table is really thinking through processes and the various touch points. I think that as with any kind of like, sort of initiative, program, project, process, whatever, there are always going to be people that are impacted that you don't necessarily consider if you just start going with it. So I think, to speak to your point in terms of, who has a seat at that table, I think that only will become apparent once you make sure that actually the current way of working and all the sort of processes and how we do things and how we operate potentially impacted. Where are the key touch points in terms of where that impact would be? Then it's those people that I think you need to come together. So in terms of who's doing that mapping, listen, if it's people process, it's probably people team, let's not lie. But I think that in terms of determining, who gets to sort of have their say at the initial bit, I think that really does depend on which bits we're thinking about, how we're thinking about implementing it, and who will be most sort of like, impacted by these changes.
Nice. Thank you very much on tackling this large question. Now I'd like to move the conversation again a bit more onto the whole compensation topic, right? We talked a bit about the pay premiums. I just saw a message in the chat that these astronomical sums were for AI researchers, right? And if you can pinpoint on what relations you actually need and what your skill set is, you can obviously narrow that down. And Chloe, you brought up that equity compensation is now rising potentially to the same level or close to the United States, right, when we see equity packages. Evert, you touched on being more than fixed pay, and also Karam, you touched on like it's really complex. If you give them a premium now, what happens in the next 6 months and these skills aren't needed anymore? So maybe you give someone advice on from a compensation perspective. What should companies do to win those talent that they specifically need, but also ensure fairness through the departments?
Do you want to go, Karam?
Yeah, no, sorry, I was just going to say I couldn't quite hear the end of that. Sorry, Nico, in terms of
no worries. Let me repeat that. My question is that obviously the complexity of AI, you have different ways of a salary component. You can have like sign-on bonuses, equity, variable, fixed, obviously. Now, let's assume that you try to find this talent. How should you pay premiums within the team?
Sorry, I hate to be an absolute diva, but I think that there's something. Maybe it's
I think there's something. Yeah.
Here all together what it is. It's always the end of your question,
Okay.
which I think is the most important bit.
The main question is, how do you, from a compensation perspective, what levers do you take to justify pay premiums for these unique roles that you just need potentially now?
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Sorry. Third time's a charm. I did hear you there. So yeah, I think to be frank, I think it's always a bit of a, 6 and 1 and half a dozen of the other of, we don't want to be setting ourselves up for future sort of like failure in terms of equity and internal equity and leapfrogging and losing incumbent talent. But at the same time, the world in which we operate sometimes does move quicker than us creating a perfect TRS and a perfect total reward offer and all this kind of stuff. So I think not to be this person about it, but it is a bit of an art as opposed to a science. So I think that there are going to be times where things that aren't necessarily base pay sort of entrenched, like LTIPs, like equity, like all of those kind of stuff. I think that would be the kind of first port of call, the more flexible elements, to steal Evert's word from earlier, in terms of the offer. But I don't think that, if you speak on my previous point, if the conversations have been had and the skills have been identified, and it really is, this role, these skills, or kind of like or nothing, then I don't think necessarily ruling out premiums as like a baseline no, because of all the things that we've said, is the way forward. But I do think that things that aren't necessarily permanent and less flexible than other elements of the reward offer should maybe be in the forefront in terms of how we're trying to sort of like be that attraction point. I also think that because this is such a new area for organizations and also some people in this space as well, I think that the opportunity to apply skills in organization specific ways and what the person will actually get in terms of development and applications of those skills, which may or may not otherwise be readily available or ready to be accepted by other organizations. Don't sleep on that. Like if you have a role that needs specific skills, and that these people are coming out and it's the skills of the moment, play into that, right? Play into the fact that they'll be able to use these skills that but other organizations might not be ready for them to be using. So I think the entirety of the offer should be available and flexible enough. But if all else fails, then start thinking about premiums. But I don't think that should be the first port of call for anything. But challenge me if other people think differently.
I think I do agree and I disagree to a certain degree. I think if you are, there are certain people that have the specific skill sets, and especially how things are moving, and depending on the company, right? Depending on the industry, depending on who you're competing against, if you really need to have this person now, otherwise in 6 months you're not going to be there anymore, then I will just maybe that's an investor way, but it's like just throw the money at it. No, you need to also be very, you still need to think about it, but I don't think you have the luxury to wait too much to maybe develop people, which I think long-term is something that you should think about. Maybe we're something that we're going to pick up when we get into further topics. But I think like if you have to pay a premium, you have to pay a premium. Because sometimes like the reality is like you're going to actually be slower, potentially lose customers, potentially lose momentum. You're going to like affect your growth. So, but I think going back to all the discussions that we had so far is about being, intentional about it. Like intentionality, I think it's a big thing. Don't just throw premiums at everybody, everywhere. Despite even if you're a company that had raised that large round with a higher valuation, money, it's not like infinite. So still, like we've learned that in the hard way in different type of the moments of the market. So I would say yes, if you have to, but really again, who and why, and do you really need to? Yeah.
I'll add a short thought. I think every company has their critical roles, so define who they are. Probably they are the minority in the company, and then apply a premium to them to make sure you can manage your business in the best way. I think the way of paying median for everybody is going to hold you down, especially if you are a growing company that needs to develop and capture market fast.
And maybe one thing, when it talks about premium, sometimes it is just talking about an extra percentage on the average or on the 50 percentile, right? And as I think you pointed out before, it is that 75th to 90 percentile that you need to achieve. We're not talking about 20%, like 5 to 20% on top of a 90 percentile. I think that's very rare, especially in equity as well. Like, there's been some occasions where we've seen 5%, not in our own companies, but 5% equity given to head of AIs. But that's literally the exception of the rule. So I think that's also important. Like but you need to be, as Evert said, above the market to attract those people.
And it also sounds like that it's super helpful to have thought about, like, what's our comp philosophy, right? Are we actually targeting the 50% for all departments? Do we have critical roles, potentially engineering or product, where we tend to pay a bit more just because the market is also asking for it? Like you said, Chloe, right? Intentionality is super important, and the strategic point of view on how you structure your business. Now, in matter of time, and because it's really important for all people probably on the call, is the pay equity part, right? We heard for potential roles, it's super important to hire them quickly and don't wait just because you don't want to invest and pay premiums. But how do you overall balance the whole pay equity topic, right? I heard, okay, a couple of exceptions are okay, but I do know from people that I speak to, hiring managers like to make exceptions of exceptions of exceptions, and then you end up having multiple exceptions and no structure anymore. So what would be your advice on, like, how do you can still emphasize the whole equity topic in your org? What are your structures, ideas? Karam, how do you do it internally as a reward expert?
Yeah, so I think what we do sort of as part of our philosophy is that we kind of have these various tenets, right? That sort of managers in the business and hiring managers need to be having in the front of their minds when we're thinking about anything, positioning on pay ranges, whether that's promotions, pay awards, recruitment, whatever it is. And I think that we really push the internal equity piece as sort of on the same level playing field as like all of the others in terms of where we're thinking. I think that, obviously being pragmatic about it and speaking to points that we've just kind of talked about, if certain skills are sort of needed and there's no other option and time's not on our side and all of those kinds of stuff, then obviously finding that right balance between sort of kind of like equity existing people versus new people coming in. But I think that when it's things like, expansion of sort of like a new area or a new team, or indeed like new skill sets that we don't necessarily have in the same way at all anyway, then I think obviously there's more flexibility there to build up in terms of these premium based sort of like approaches, because it's not necessarily kind of to use everyone's favorite sort of phrase, work of equal value, or same work of equal value as the directive is coming out. But I think that is sort of a key part of it in terms of making sure that, because I think that the thing about it is that it's a great thing to sort of get this new talent in and with these new emerging skills, etc. But we don't want to be sort of alienating and disenfranchising people that are already there, right? People who already have the loyalty element, they have the skills that we have needed. Just because we might need new ones or additional ones now, we don't want to sort of like put them out to dry. So I think it's never easy, but I think that whichever side of the coin you sort of fall on, sort of practicality has to win out. I think that if there are sort of people that, there's no other sort of alternative in terms of skills requirements in time, as Chloe was saying earlier, but also at the same time, if you do have more of a wider pool and can sort of balance that out in terms of an equity piece, I think that sort of should be always in the forefront of your mind. So I'm realizing that that's not necessarily a sort of black and white answer, but I don't think it's always a black and white conversation in terms of, balancing it. It's not an easy thing. And I think that there isn't really one hard and fast rule to apply, unfortunately, because if there were, then everyone's lives would be much simpler, right?
That makes sense. Anybody wants to add something from you on? Chloe, Evert, any thoughts that crossed your mind?
I mean, ultimately, the system has to be objective, and you need to be able to justify why you have made the decisions you have made. And if certain skills and certain roles carry a premium and you need to have them, just make sure you don't you don't treat men preferably. That's the ultimate aim of the directive, right? So if we are letting ourselves be influenced by the negotiation skills of different candidates, then that opens us up for a lot of questions and potential problems. So objectivity and ability to defend all of the decisions made is kind of the key, I think, going into 2026 June.
I think also when we talked about what I've seen, that more founders are actually bringing more structure in when it comes to their compensation. That hopefully will also kind of, if we're because a lot of the times what I've seen, like, people being able to negotiate their salary, it's usually at the very early stage. People are like, everything is about the Wild West. So if you bring structure a little bit sooner, maybe you can be a little bit more like, no, this is it, and doesn't, kind of reduce that pay gap. Hopefully, I mean, it's still a very long journey that we're on, but hopefully we see that. The question, I mean, there is going to be what I've seen also in AI companies is very much about the type of people that will have those roles. Right now, there is a bit of a gap in terms of, there are higher number of men that will have ML jobs than women, unfortunately. And so we're kind of picking that up a little bit quicker. But I think ideally you will also have the companies invest a little bit more into that, right? It's also a cost to keep hiring outside. Probably, kind of maybe look into how to develop those skill sets, especially if it's not very niche, as Karam said before, right? And very specific, then might be, yeah.
Sorry. Thank you so much. I'm glad that you brought up the topic, specifically like the European Pay Transparency Directive happening in June. Like you said, Karam, what we can see is there are still a lot of pay gaps or larger pay gaps depending on the departments and the roles. And Evert, you already brought up a tip on being objective and don't get fooled by the negotiation skills. Chloe, you said that you see these gaps specifically for like early stage startups. What are you advising companies that are a bit more mature in your portfolio on? How are they tackling the directive? What are your advice that you give them and lay out the structure?
I think first of all, it's being able to see this, right? Sometimes companies, even like more mature companies, are very much just working out of spreadsheets, and it's not great. And so first of all, really analyze the data and analyze the company, like their people and where they are, and really make the effort to bridge it, right? Especially if people are doing exactly the same job, kind of asking, why did we get there? Maybe there is a lot of the time it's legacy, right? It just happens, and then people just give it like a little bit of a bump down the road, promotion, all of that. It's just always been there in a way. So really being able to tackle that. Yeah.
Karam, maybe you can tackle it from your point of view as well, because multiple countries.
Absolutely. I think that, yeah, in terms of, the gaps, especially sort of like in the upcoming sort of presence of the directive, I think that it probably, in terms of, where to pinpoint actions, et cetera, that is kind of based in this sort of nebulous thing of categorization, right? I think that, once we have sort of like the frameworks of categorization and the leveling and all of that kind of stuff, then we can start to, as organizations, really sort of drill in and pinpoint kind of where gaps exist, between sort of, these sort of equal value roles, etc. So I think that step one in sort of addressing any of those is being able to identify them. And so I think that, again, to speak of breathing space, but while we have the breathing space ahead of member states sort of confirming what on earth they're going to be doing in terms of legislation, sort of, we know that a baseline kind of, across the way is going to be something that's based in equal valued work. And so I think that before we start getting into the weeds of like, this is this percent and this would cost this much to close this gap, and backtracking, which is an important step, I think having the frameworks there. I mean, not to sit on my high horse, but we're quite lucky in GoCardless that we have an established leveling framework to sort of like, base sort of that on. But I think that is, the real sort of fundamental, which will enable sort of you to identify those gaps, and then you can think about closing them in the run up to the directive, or indeed, afterwards with the reporting 5%, etc. But I think that's the almost the first half of that puzzle, if you like, right, in terms of being able to know where they are, let alone how to address them.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but if I would summarize what you said, again, it comes down to setting the foundation early with having a structure in place, like a seniority level framework. Doesn't matter how big your organization is, you can always like layer out this or extensify the different levels that you have, but have this leveling framework. Think about potentially a unique, how do you call it, a structured job catalog. So don't get too creative with all of the unique positions. I know on LinkedIn there are fancy titles out there, but sometimes it really helps to break it down to what they're actually doing and how can you make them comparable. And once you have these two things, it's really about thinking, okay, what does equal pay for equal work really means for our organization? Maybe Evert, you also work at Bolt, but you also have your own consultancy. What are your examples or practical steps that you share with companies that potentially approach you, and how can we actually be prepared for the directive?
I mean, the number one thing is the same thing. Get your job architecture in place. Leveling, salary bands, all of these things, create the framework and follow it. But in addition to that, I do think that the base structure probably is going to become a bit more complex. I do see that companies will have a more similar approach to base salary and trying to keep that similar between the different people in the company, and then having these other elements to reward for performance, to retain certain employees, to pay premiums for certain skills or certain locations. I do see that as something that we also might need to do to make sure that we have objective reasoning that base salary is comparable, but then there are these other elements that are given to certain employees for specific situations or specific needs. So I think that is something that we need to be ready for and be able to find those elements that we are able to offer or willing to offer, such as spot bonuses or performance-based bonuses, or replacing merit increases with a bonus to not create any bigger caps into the company.
And I think that, just to sort of build on that again, I think that, in terms of those various sort of tools in our arsenal, in terms of being able to use them more flexibly, I think that there's also, on the flip side of that, us doing this work and like having, this framework, what have you, there's also an engagement point around socialization of those things with the wider business. I think that it's never too early to start sort of, if you have a philosophy in place or methodologies that you're already using, to start communicating those, to start getting your wider organization familiar with them. Because at the end of the day, when this directive comes in and we start sort of, doing the work, and obviously, analysis request comes in, etc., there will be obviously a heavy analytical element to it, but also an equally as heavy, rightly so, engagement point. So I think that ahead of, at the same time, in parallel, all this technical analytical prep that's going on with the frameworks, etc., start those conversations, start engaging the business, start getting them ready. Because I think to go into it cold with, this is the directive, this is what we do, this is our philosophy, this is our methodology, this is your pay range, like it's a lot, right? So I think that, and as soon as any of those moving parts are mature enough to be sort of like putting out into and spreading the good word, then I think that it's, it's never a bad thing to start with that.
Okay, sorry, I thought you unmuted.
That's all I had on that.
Oh no, sorry, it was me. Sorry, yeah, I had a thought, and then I was like, oh, I agree with what Karam said, and then.
Thank you. I wanted to say the same thing, that we had an event, I think 3 months ago, where Claudia, former CPO at Aviv, was saying something similar. Like, communication is also key when you look at compensation, right? Enabling your managers, enabling your leadership to really explain what a salary means, what the composition of it are, and also compa ratio, all of these terminologies that are really familiar to all of you, right? It's your bread and butter, but it's not for all the workforce. And also, you can't make anybody, all of the people happy in an organization, right? But as a human being, if you have a structure, if you know why your company is taking certain decisions, you can at least follow them and understand them, right? And that's a good foundation of communicating why certain things happen. So I'm agreeing with all of the points. In matter of time, we have 5 more minutes, and before we close the whole session today, I would love to ask each of you for one quick piece of advice. What should compensation or people leaders prioritize heading into 2026?
Maybe I can start. I think for things will change, and AI is here to stay. AI is changing a lot of it, so it is gonna impact every single part of the people organization, and probably compensation right now it's not affected yet per se, but we'll see it very soon. So really, as we said through this whole conversation, if you have the time to really think about where we're going to be in the next 18 to 24 months, take the time to implement things that will make your team, the organization more efficient, better suited to, kind of be more future-proof. There's a lot of things you can do. There are things that you can optimize the organization for. So, work together with the entire function to really implement things like initiatives that will make the future organization better equipped to all the changes that will be coming. Yeah, that would be my point.
Thank you, Chloe. Evert, can I hand over to you the question?
Sure. If you have employees in the European Union, you have to be ready for the pay transparency. So that would be my main message, to review the systems that you have and make sure any updates are made in time where you need to make them, and upskill your managers as well, because ultimately they need to be having those conversations with the employees. And I see time and time again managers struggling with some of these discussions. But another, maybe just a short thought is whatever you put out to the company, test it with AI first. Your employees are going to do it. Your managers are going to do it. They're going to challenge you with everything, and make sure that you have that part covered before you go live with something.
I really like that type. Karam, what's your...
I guess, coming at it from a very selfish analyst lens, I think, just get your house in order, right? AI and all of these directives and all of this stuff is going to be as good as what you're putting into them and what you're using them for. So I think, everything that you're sort of doing already, is it squeaky clean? Is the data there? We all know that for everyone, it's never always there, but get it as good as you can. I think that would be my key piece of advice, because when things come, they're going to come quick, and they're going to come with the expectation that we're just ready to implement them in the way that people are expecting and wanting us to. And I think that when they do come in and, people are looking to us saying, oh yeah, no, sorry, we haven't been able to do it yet because we've still got a couple of blanks on the HR system. That's outrageous, right? So I think that, yeah, get your house as clean as you can, I think is my main one.
Amazing. Thank you all so much for being here with me, being here with us. I want to say a huge thank you to all of you, Evert, Karam, Chloe. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom. And also for the audience, thank you for staying with us for the full 60 minutes. I really appreciate that on a Thursday afternoon, especially end of the year. I know everybody has loads to do, so I hope you learned something new today. And at the end of the day, I think it comes down to the foundation, right? Like Karam said, get your house in order, clean up everything that you still have time for, so you're better prepared for 2026. If there's anything else that you want to know, I'm more than happy. You can reach out to them. You can reach out to us. We are happy to share the reports. I can see that Danica was already doing that in the chat. And thank you so much for being here. And with that, I'd say we are out.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Well,
Thank you.
bye.
Bye.